There comes a moment, usually in the quiet hours when the house settles into stillness, when you begin to feel it, not a physical ache but something deeper, a weariness that has nothing to do with the body, and everything to do with the weight you have been carrying for decades. The silent accumulation of every favor you granted without reciprocity, every criticism you absorbed without protest, every obligation you met without question, until the day arrives when the simple act of breathing feels like lifting stones, and yet you keep lifting because somewhere along the way you were taught that love means lifting, even when your arms are shaking, that being good means saying yes even when your whole body is whispering no, that loyalty means staying even when the room has become so thick with other people's needs that you can barely see your own reflection in the mirror, and so you stay, you lift, you breathe the heavy air. And you tell yourself that this is what it means to be needed. This is what it means to matter. This is what it means to be a good mother, father, sister, brother, friend, neighbor, until one night in the hush between the last creak of the floorboards and the first chirp of the morning birds, you feel the weariness rise up like a tide and you realize it is not asking for your permission. It is informing you that something has already changed, that the account is overdrawn, that the reservoir is empty, that the time for pretending is finished, and in that moment you understand that the ache you have been calling duty is actually grief. Grief for the years you spent believing that your value was measured by how much you could carry without breaking. Grief for the version of yourself you never met because you were too busy being whoever everyone else needed you to be. Grief for the simplicity of waking up and wondering not who needs you today, but what you need from the miracle of another day. And once that grief is named, it becomes a door. A small cracked door that lets in a draft of something unfamiliar and electric, something that feels suspiciously like freedom, terrifyingly like selfishness, deliciously like the beginning of your own life. You have held doors open for certain people. You have answered every call. You have absorbed every criticism and carried every burden that was never yours to carry. And you have done it with such grace that no one noticed the way your shoulders began to curve under the invisible weight. No one noticed how your laughter started to arrive a half-second late, how your eyes began to search the room for an exit even while your mouth was saying, "Of course I'll help." No one noticed because you were so skilled at making it look easy, at making it look like love, at making it look like what a good person does. And in that performance you lost track of the difference between love and servitude, between generosity and self-erasure, between being present for others and being absent from yourself, until the night the weariness spoke and you finally asked the question you had been afraid to ask your entire adult life. What if I stop? What if I set this down? What if I discover that the world does not fall apart when I no longer hold it together? What if the people who have been leaning on me learn to stand on their own 2 feet? What if their discomfort when I step back is not proof of my cruelty, but proof of their growth waiting to happen? What if the space I am terrified to create becomes the place where I finally meet myself, where I finally hear my own voice, where I finally learn what I actually want when no one is waiting for me to want it on their behalf? Through meditation, we discover an ancient truth the Buddha himself taught 26 centuries ago in the Sigalovada Sutta. A truth he spoke with unusual directness, something most spiritual teachers avoid because it sounds too harsh, too final, too much like the kind of advice that will be misunderstood as cruelty rather than wisdom. There are people in your life, even those connected by blood, who are not friends at all. They are what he called enemies disguised as friends, and the wisdom of aging lies not in enduring them out of misplaced loyalty, but in recognizing them with clear eyes and choosing your peace over their presence, not because you have stopped loving them, but because you have finally started loving yourself enough to refuse participation in the slow erosion of your own vitality. And this recognition arrives not as a sudden bolt of lightning, but as a quiet accumulation of moments when you notice how your chest tightens when their name appears on your phone, how your stomach drops when you hear their car in the driveway, how your breathing becomes shallow when they begin the familiar litany of complaints that always ends with a request you are expected to fulfill, how your body has been keeping score even while your mind was busy rationalizing, busy explaining, am busy telling the story of how they don't mean to take so much, how they are going through a hard time, how family helps family, how friends show up, how good people give until it hurts and then give some more, until one day you notice that the hurt has become a wound that never closes, that the giving has become a reflex that never asks whether you have received. And in that noticing you understand that the Buddha was not being harsh, he was being precise. He was offering you a map out of the maze of obligation that has kept you wandering in circles searching for an exit that was always marked with your own name. This is not about bitterness or anger. This is about liberation, the kind that arrives quietly without fireworks, the kind that begins with the simple recognition that the nature of mind becomes clearer with age. And what becomes unmistakably clear is that you have walked through fire, survived storms, and earned the right to spend your remaining years in tranquility, not as a reward for good behavior, but as the natural consequence of finally understanding that compassion begins with oneself. And there is no compassion in allowing yourself to be diminished by relationships that drain rather than nourish, that take rather than share, that imprison rather than expand. And yet understanding this truth is only the first step, because the next step requires you to act on it, to speak it aloud, to live it in the face of people who have never known you to say no, who have built their entire expectation of you on the foundation of your eternal yes, who will react to your boundary as if it were a betrayal rather than a birth, who will accuse you of changing, of becoming cold, of abandoning them, who will not see that what they are calling abandonment is actually the first time you have chosen to stay with yourself, rather than leave yourself in order to stay with them. And this is where the real practice begins, not in the comfortable solitude of your meditation cushion where the truth is easy to see, but in the messy, tear-streaked, guilt-soaked conversations where you must speak your boundary again and again until your voice stops shaking, where you must tolerate their disappointment as if it were a storm passing through your body, where you must remind yourself every time the old guilt rises that their feelings are not evidence of your wrongdoing, but evidence that the pattern is finally being broken, that the system of mutual exploitation you were taught to call love is finally being rewritten into something that has room for your breathing, room for your longing, room for the strange and terrifying realization that you are allowed to take up space in your own life, that you are allowed to want more than the satisfaction of being needed, that you are allowed to discover what waits for you on the other side of the identity you built one yes at a time, one favor at a time, one swallowed objection at a time, until the shape of your life became indistinguishable from the shape of everyone else's expectations, and you became a ghost haunting your own calendar, forever available, forever helpful, forever tired, forever gone. Ancient wisdom teaches that every interaction is an exchange of energy, a subtle commerce of attention and emotion, and in healthy relationships that exchange nourishes both people, creating a circuit that grows stronger with each reciprocated kindness, each shared silence, each mutual celebration. But the enemies disguised as friends create a one-way current that flows only toward themselves. They are emotional vampires who feed on your willingness to stay open, your habit of saying yes before you check whether your own tank is empty, your conditioned reflex to prioritize their comfort over your survival. And after 6 decades of life, you no longer have the reserves to sustain them, nor the illusion that your sacrifice will somehow transform them into givers. And this recognition lands not as a judgment of them, but as a fierce act of protection of the life you have left. The days that are numbered, the mornings that are precious, the evenings that are no longer guaranteed, the breaths that are finally too valuable to spend trying to fill someone else's bottomless bucket. And yet even as you see this clearly, you will still wake up some days certain that you are being selfish, certain that you are failing at the one thing you were always praised for being good at, certain that the phone will ring and you will answer with your old voice, the one that says of course, the one that agrees before hearing the request, the one that would rather be exhausted than disappointing. And on those days you will need to return to the breath again and again, to remind yourself that the discomfort you feel is not proof that you are doing something wrong, but proof that you are doing something new, that the guilt is not a signal to turn back, but a sign that you are crossing the border into unfamiliar territory, where your worth is no longer measured by your usefulness to others, where your value is no longer calculated by how much you can carry without breaking, where your identity is no longer a ledger of other people's needs balanced against your own extinction, where you are finally allowed to be more than the sum of what others extract from you, where you are finally allowed to discover what grows in the soil of your own attention, what blooms when you water yourself first, what quiet, surprising joy rises when you realize that the sky does not fall when you say no, that the people who truly love you will learn to stand in their own strength, that the people who only loved your usefulness will fall away, and that their falling is not a tragedy but a cleansing, not a loss but a liberation, not an ending but a beginning. You have been preparing for your entire life without knowing you were preparing for it, through every sleepless night, through every swallowed word, through every yes that should have been no, through every ache you mistook for virtue, through every moment you chose being needed over being whole, until the day the weariness spoke and you finally understood that the heaviest thing you have been carrying is not age itself, but the people who drain your life force with every interaction, and that putting them down is not an act of cruelty, but an act of survival, not an act of rejection but an act of reclamation, not an act of ending but an act of beginning, the beginning of the years that belong to you, the beginning of the voice that speaks your truth, the beginning of the life that waits on the other side of the yes you finally stop saying, the life that has been patient, the life that has been kind, the life that has been waiting for you to come home to yourself, to step into the bright, clear space where your own needs are not an interruption but an invitation, where your own desires are not an indulgence but a map, where your own company is not a consolation prize but a celebration, where you are finally, blessedly, irrevocably free.